This evening, some of you may have noticed over the last several weeks, Kiranada has appeared. She's been welcoming people at the door like she owns the place, right? Like she's been here forever. And yet a lot of you have started coming more recently. You may not have met her previously. That's because she's been cloistered away for the last 3 years on a solitary retreat. So she's recently emerged. This wasn't the first long solitary she's done. She had done a year-long solitary several years ago. What year was that?
2014-15.
Yeah. So she disappeared for a while then and came back. And just when everyone got used to seeing her here, she disappeared again, this time for triple time. So Kiranada has, this is a big part of her practice, is doing solitary retreat. And it's a rare opportunity that someone's able to actually do that. And so it's actually really valuable for all of us to hear about what that's like and the insights that arise in that sort of space. Kiranada has been a part of the Aryaloka Sangha and a part of the International Kiranada Sangha for over 20 years now, correct?
No.
No?
Not quite.
Huh. Close?
Close though.
Yeah.
Maybe
okay.
15.
Oh, is it that? Is that it? I think it's longer, but you would know better than I.
You met me at the door.
You remember you were away for 3 years, right?
That's right. That's right.
That still counts as time.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. So I've known actually Kiranada since she first started coming along to Aryaloka. We met way back when.
You're right, 20 years ago.
Yeah. And she engaged very quickly and thoroughly, really becoming a part of the community in a substantial way. And I'm sorry, I don't know the year you were ordained.
2009.
2009, yeah. So she was ordained in 2009, and yeah. So as I said, she's been here, and when she is here, she is a substantial force at Aryaloka. She is a champion of the arts, and she keeps us on track with a lot of things. Although she didn't catch me without my name tag tonight. I forgot my name tag. But she is very attentive to important things like that, and to making people feel welcome, and to making sure people can find their way here. And she's, yes, a champion of the arts. She supports artists generally, but particularly at Aryaloka as well. I know she's very encouraging of Deb, whose work is on the wall this evening. So Kiranada, I know, encouraged this show. So you're back 3 months, so we've got an art show on the wall. So it's not a coincidence. So I'm going to hand this over to Kiranada now and allow her to talk about her 3 years of solitude, 1,000 days of solitude. Sorry. Yeah. Yeah.
Thank you very much.
Yep.
So it is my home, Aryaloka, for sure. And I think Sudaya was one of my first teachers. I came through the door and up the stairs, and he was busy teaching, so that long ago. So I'm delighted to be invited to share this special time in my life with you tonight. So 1,000 days alone in mid-America. I'm a New Englander. For those of you new to Triratna and to Aryaloka, and I know there are some people here and also online, those of us in training for ordination are encouraged to do solitary retreats each year, one each year, to be quiet and meditate and to reflect on all the process that process allows us to take it in. So I started doing solitary retreats in 2006 in Thailand at at a Theravada monastery in Chiang Mai. I'm a bit of a traveler, it's true. So, my interest in solitary retreat came from childhood, roaming the forests of New Hampshire alone, and a movie that I saw, maybe as a teenager, the movie The Birdman of Alcatraz, where Robert Stroud was in solitary confinement for 43 years. 43 years. Wow. I thought, what would it be like? Could I do it? Would I survive? Would I benefit? I was curious, even then, as a teenager. But know that these long periods of seclusion are not so usual, even in Triratna Buddhist order. I am one of very few in my order who have done a 3-year solitary, that's not a silent, but a solitary retreat, or even a 1-year solitary. But I read and research and take inspiration from many other sources too. So I'm not sure why it appeals to me, but it does. 1,000 days, 3 years in seclusion, seeing no one, eating my own food for days and days, hearing only birdsong, no music, no friends to chat with, no hearing precepts or mantras, no humans, no smiles. In the heartland of America, 20 miles from the great Mississippi River that divides our country from east to west. This was the first time I'd ever been living for any length of time in mid-America, for sure. It seemed like a good idea after a most beneficial year of silence on a precipice in New Zealand in 2014, 2015. A good chance to dig deeper into my practice, to explore the things that had come up during that earlier retreat, to know myself better, to learn. We know that a retreatant withdraws temporarily from the world to gain spiritual strength required to be able to help others effectively. But as they tell you, every retreat is different. What you thought you would work on may not materialize. Each retreat presents unique conditions that we best accept, and I found this to be exceedingly true from 2019 to 2022. I thought I would follow Matthew Ricard, he's a French monk, his dictum. He said that a short retreat was like taking a spade and turning over the earth. With a year-long retreat, perhaps you could dig a small hole. But with a 3-year retreat, you might be able to dig deeper and may even hit water. I kept waiting. What I found was that first initial year in the cedar forest of Kentucky was actually like a huge pile of dung plunked on top of that planned hole of mine. And I learned to deal with it and to grow from it and what was given: acceptance, patience, persistence, dealing with fear and loneliness, a lack of support on many fronts. Early in my retreat, I looked at what brought me to this 3-year undertaking and what inspired me over the years to do more than 13 solitary retreats in Wales, Mexico, Java, New Zealand, Thailand, places that I can go in the wintertime that are warm, warmer than New Hampshire. And I wrote my observations in a poem, which I called Only New, that echoed Atisha's sentiments from the 11th century. And it was published actually in the Voucher Bell, and it's called Only New. If we only knew how very hard it is to slip into one of these human lives, rare and precious, to have a chance to learn, to love, to know, to be guided and supported in that search. How very special and unique the journey truly is. How easily lost and hard to attain. If we only woke up and knew, we'd work with such deep intention. Yes, as if our hair was on fire. Or we'd go off for 3 years to the forest to think on it. I did. But people continued to ask, to question why. My cousin, an Anglican priest, wrote and asked why I would go off, knowing of my great love of people, supporting others. And what was the purpose of exiting from society for so very long? I reflected about that, what I was doing, and what I might gain. The purpose of seclusion. Judson Tenzin Palmo, I know her well, but maybe you don't. She lived 13 years in a cave in snow in the Himalayas. Said that a solitary retreatant's duty or purpose was to be a beacon in the dark, beaming out love and compassion on the world. When she also wrote that in this time of darkness, with its greed, violence, and ignorance, it's important that there are areas of light in the gloom, something to balance all the heaviness and darkness. She sounded as if she was describing the tumultuous time of America and world politics and the strife that predominated even before the pandemic arrived, just as I entered retreat. I was in retreat 7 months when the pandemic hit. Historically, solitary retreat is one, to create conditions for awakening, yo. 2, the work also told me it was to liberate self, to gain freedom from attachments, to create opportunity for deep reflection, to promote self-understanding, to gain inspiration and renewed energy. 3, I saw myself letting go of identity and gaining some self-worth separate from a role. Passing out name tags downstairs. 4, I looked at separating myself from expectation, from criticism of others. Again and again, throughout those long days and months, I found myself 5, addressing painful thoughts from the past and emotions that I formerly had avoided. And I sank down into basic aloneness and gained strength, changing that loneliness into aloneness, moving beyond self. 6, I found myself released into a greater sense of sufficiency, becoming intimate with my surroundings, and perhaps more importantly, becoming aware of larger relationships, interbeing. Solitary retreat taught me to let go of self, all of it, completely. And it taught me what it was, 7, what it was like to be watched by a deer, to echo the foot stomps and the head bobs, and lastly, to carry all of that home with me to benefit others. So I show up here. But early on, even with little news from outside, I knew in 2019 that something was bubbling up. In late 2019 and early 2020, before any pandemic hit, I knew there was a flood of fear rippling through my country, echoed by others who wrote letters to me. I knew there were little blurps that the land was burning that summer. Shootings happening daily. Can you remember this? And into the next year, deaths mounted. My country burned. The environment destroyed even more. Families separated at the border. Guns picked up instead of mental health support. As police action became more radicalized, divisions became deeper. And then the pandemic hit. I'm doing a history report for you right now. Unheard of in our immediate history, not since the 1918 epidemic that took 16 million lives worldwide over a 2-year period, 100 years before. And with all the upheaval, everyone suffered. The lockdowns, the deaths, the fear of contagion, the tumultuous USA elections were scheduled. Barricades went up, and later the government was confronted. You lived this over the past 3 years, and you remember. And as all this happened, I wept. This is my country, I said to the walls. The one I came home to from Japan 20 years ago to meet Shudayu downstairs in the outer hall, so that I could work for change. By the fall of 2020, I did what I could do on solitary retreat. I turned to my practice and my Yidam Kuan-Yin, my special guardian deity. I laid my body down on the floor in front of my shrine with my back in mid-America, imagining myself lying along the Mississippi River. I put my toes in Mexico and all those suffering there along the border. My head in my neighbor, Canada. I reached out to the West Coast with my left hand and the East Coast friends with my right, and sent love and acceptance. I laid there, wrapping my arms around those suffering people, this suffering country, this suffering world, and sent what blessings of loving kindness that I could, as we did this evening upstairs. Did it help? By the way, on my shrine, there were photos of His Holiness the Dalai Lama, as well as Bhante and Kamala Sheila and Donald Trump. Friends saw photographs of my shrine and said, "What's he doing there?" All of these were reminders for my Metabhavana practice of sending loving kindness, as we did tonight. On election day, November 3rd, 2020, I chanted 1,400 mantras, sending love to all for a safe and ordered political election. And I said, I am here for the long haul. Blessed be. This is what we do on solitary retreat when we're not out in the world. The focus and benefits of retreat. I came across a Spanish Catholic theologian recently who studied Zen and found that he clearly was speaking my words on focus and benefits. Father Pablo Dores says, the fruits of meditation or solitary retreat are nobly perceived outside of each as a greater acceptance of life as it is, a greater acceptance of one's limitations and one's aches and pains, a greater benevolence towards one's fellows, and a more careful attention to the needs of others, a greater appreciation of animals and nature, a more global and less analytical vision of the world. and a growing openness to diversity, humility, self-confidence, and serenity. I moved from Kentucky to Missouri in October of 2020 for my last 2 years, 15 months into my 36-month retreat. A small group of Catholic nuns who believed in silence and seclusion welcomed me. Farmland bordered by vast forests of oak, eastern cedar, and hickory surrounded my small cottage. I connected with nature, relishing in my friends the birds that were so forbidden to me in Kentucky. I meditated in the woods almost every day, winter and summer, and developed a deep, visceral connection to that forest, to those words. I brought this little book with me, some quotations that I gathered while on solitary, and it includes this poem that I wrote. Sitting with trees, toes in damp earth, rooted. Back against tree, strong. I slip inside and become one. Grounded, strengthened, patient, flexible, stable, persevering. I mix my being with that of this tree and listen, traveling up rough bark. With sap running smoothly, raising my arms upward, I grow limbs, branches. Spreading my fingers wide, they become web-like, lacy expansions. That become buds in frothy green patterns, later, a canopy of leaves kissed by the sun. Quietly, I sit, going down to earth, riding ridges up to the sky, dipping inside, becoming one, toes in damp earth, back on tree. That benevolence towards others and attention to the needs of others that Father Doris mentioned also showed among those trees, and also spotlighting a love of mine, diversity. It's a strange love, perhaps. I was working with internal reflections in an area of confession when a childhood friend of mine came to mind again and again, someone I'd not seen for 30 or 40 years. By serendipity, I connected to this beautiful friend, and we fell into sharing some texts about race, something on both of our minds. I heard of her memories growing up Black in my New England community, and she heard my sincere concern and continued support. Ironically, the forest was right there to teach me of this too, showing me some of its true diversity. Again, I write this right below something by Thomas Merton, if you can imagine that, and above the Dhammapala. This morning, the forest is covered with new green and tiny white flowers that nod in the breeze. I sit in the land of mid-America, a deep grove of trees, and awaken to diversity. I see tree trunks, smooth, patterned, rough, knobby, ribbed, shaggy, fibrous, and checkerboarded. All different, all here, living harmoniously together. A play of colors, silver white and russet brown, pastel beige, black, slate gray, even blue. Not one excluded, none elevated, all noble beings, all trees, accepted, included, even accommodated. Some seem to lean over, adjusting their growth to let others receive the nourishing light. I look and learn and wonder if our human society could be like this forest grove, delighted, included, relished, celebrated even, reaching heavenward to the sky with hands outreached. This is what happens when you're alone. You start writing poetry. While on retreat, I also looked at aging and impermanence and death, studying 7 different texts and listening to numerous talks. As in the 3 years, I lost 22 friends and loved ones during that 3-year solitude, 5 in 1 week this past January. Even more so, perhaps, since they were lost while I was alone and in seclusion, I feel even more strongly that they are not gone. I merely have to open a door, remember to have them here in my life once more for me to learn from. Yes, in a new form, in a different realm, but still with me, loving me. Patience, acceptance, confidence, dropping self, nature, diversity, death, interconnectedness. And I came home with new eyes, seeing things from a most unique perspective, hearing people discount me in some ways, saying, you don't know, you just don't know what we've been through. I came back to New England, to a land, to a world so traumatized by lockdown, its own seclusion, not by choice, to fear and anxiety and stress, full of mourning and grief. They seemed unable to even notice the present, the beauty and love and compassion that surrounds all of us so abundantly. I saw how we can focus on pain and disaster and destruction and breakdown, or we can use the wings we have been given to lift out of that morass, lift out to see the connections we have, the beauty, the kindness, the generosity of people, of land, that it's a choice we make, that we can hold up our hand of fearlessness, abaya, or fold them down and wring them in anguish. How my Yiram wraps me in loving kindness and encourages me to say thank you 10 times every day for all of it. On my solitary retreat, besides being present there in that moment, I also examined my life and chose to teach, to reach out, to love, to be present, to be appreciative, to be fearless and joyful and grateful for this life, this one chance. To do this, I watch what I take in. And that includes the internet, the news, the push for commercialism. An internet quote that I did find rings true. A country whose permanently distracted people don't even acknowledge each other's existence, each other's presence. Not always, but too often to ignore. The Buddha said, dissolving the barriers we erect between ourselves and the world is the best use of this human life. So, why was it important for me to come tonight and pass out name tags and speak with you, to share, to bring an offering of my 1,000 days of seclusion, to bring some of the words that inspired and encouraged me? I remembered again and again that I was doing this for others, for the benefit of others, as the Bodhisattvas say. I came here tonight because I needed to carry this to you and lay it on your altar so that you too could be inspired. And as an earlier book on my 1-year solitary retreat, I wrote about that one year on a precipice in New Zealand in 2014 and said, it was to let go, to be purged, washed by the night rain, seen through by the full moon, to be liberated, freed, let loose from all samsaric bonds of suffering, to see with fresh eyes, to be aware of the deep silence that supports us, to return to source, drink there, be renewed, and then step out again, to let that compassionate heart flow and spill over. All these things I learned on solitary retreat. Sure, I'd be happy to. I'm also delighted. I just saw a few names too, to have my friend Neil and Rebecca and Forrest and a few other people that aren't able to be here and even live far and wide joining us tonight. Do you have some questions? You know why you did it. Yes, Chris.
At the very beginning, you mentioned sort of the details of your solitariness, and they included no music for 3 years. Is that true?
Yes.
And if so, why? It seems like you stayed in contact with people via text messaging, and you watched the news or follow along on the news. You had some idea of what was going on.
Yes, but I did not watch the news.
But ultimately, my question is, why music?
Why music? I actually listened to mantras, but I didn't want anything that might distract in some way, and so I included music among that. Yeah. In another case, it might have been different, but yeah.
Is that couched in any type of like meditation philosophy, technology, or anything like that? Like, is there deeper? Because I've heard music sort of maligned every now and again in meditation traditions. I'm not saying that you are doing that, but it's an interesting thing to say.
It's interesting to look at.
No music for 3 years.
Well, it's interesting. I mean, because I'm an artist and I have visual arts around me all the time, and poetry and music is one of those expressions as well. So I completely and wholeheartedly support that expression for sure. Yeah. But I didn't bring all my music with me. Yeah. It's unbelievable what quiet is. It's unbelievably strong what silence is. So that I didn't speak my mantras, or I whispered them, because silence is it's so heavy and so strong and so pure. So I lived in silence. Yeah. Yes.
Did you do any visual arts during that time? Painting or drawing or anything of that sort?
I'm a visual artist. I'm not a poet.
Okay.
Yeah, and so I do, but because of that, people thought, a year away, 3 years away, it's an art retreat or whatever, and I wanted to be sure it was not that. That was not the reason. So I did do art, not every day, but probably every week. Some. I did a lot more meditation under trees, and it was not the usual art that I do. Actually, it was an awful lot of stitching. A lot of things that I could hold in my lap and just sit there. And as a matter of fact, I'll be showing that next April. Art from 3 years of silence. So it'll be on the walls here. I'm working on trying to pull it all together. So come and see.
Okay, thank you.
What meditation practices did you engage with? Did you have a system, or were you just doing the same practice every sit? What was that like?
I did many of the meditation practices that we do here on a regular basis. My intention was to go heavily into Mahamudra and Dzogchen and all of this. And it didn't happen. It just, as I had to say, each retreat presents something different to you. I really think it was the tenor of the times. I picked up all of the vibes, all of that energy through the ether that you were all suffering and struggling with. And that influenced the time in solitary retreat for sure. And it didn't seem like a time to be doing that kind of heavy meditation practices that I thought I would be doing. So I picked up what I could. I again went to the forest and said, teach me. I'm open. What can I learn from you? I looked at my past history, did lots of confession, personal examination, reflections, really. So, yes, thank you.
Everywhere you could have spent your retreat, what made you pick that part of the country?
His question was, why did I pick that part of the country? I had no choice. I wrote to 43 different retreat spaces, and there was only 2 that I could have gone to, 2 out of 43. My problem was it was 3 years. Visas are an issue. When I went to New Zealand, it was a real stretch for me to be able to do a year in New Zealand. They only let Americans there for 6 months, maybe 9 months. They stretched it for me so I could be there 12 months, and I had to be out of the country immediately. But not 3 years. I couldn't even go to Canada for 3 years. A possibility of going to Spain, where we have retreat centers there, where I couldn't do that. The lucky thing was I didn't even make that attempt, because when the pandemic came, it would have all been shut down and I would have had to leave and come home. I ended up in Kentucky and Missouri in mid-America, because the other places in the United States were all at 8,500 feet. The Tibetan retreat places were very high up that offered solitary retreat, and that altitude, I've had problems with altitude in the past, and I didn't want to be sick for the first 3 months, or maybe have to leave because of it. So this was better altitude for me, and they said welcome me. In the future, I certainly would prefer to be at a Buddhist retreat center than where I was, but I was happy that I had a roof over my head and a bed, and somebody who could buy groceries from my list and leave them in the forest in the box for me to pick up once a week. Great support.
Is there anyone on Zoom who has a question? Go ahead, you can just unmute yourself and ask if you do. If not, are there any other questions here?
Did you have electricity? That's it.
Excuse me, say it again.
Did you have any electricity in either of the facilities or that you stayed at?
This retreat for 3 years was much more accommodating than my year in New Zealand. In New Zealand, I only had 1 light bulb and solar electricity, 12 volts, that's all I had. So I just got up when the sun got up and went to bed when it went down, and that was the way I lived, like a bear or something. It was good. It was good. In this 3-year one, I really did have better accommodations at one of the places than what I have in Kingston, New Hampshire, where I throw my dishwater over the front porch still because of not having a septic system. So yeah, I had electricity. Thank you. Yeah.
Someone on Zoom asked, will you do it again?
I probably will continue to do some solitary retreats. Would I do a 3-year solitary retreat again? Is that what the person is asking?
I would presume.
I got old. If I was 50, yes, most definitely. Maybe even if I was 60, not a question. But I think this was my last chance to do a 3-year one. I'm in remarkably good health for someone my age, but it's not advisable to be pulling this off again. But solitary retreat is very much a part of my life, and important. I wanted to mention Words from the Wise on Solitary Retreat is a small book that I put together, and people here at Arialoka managed to make it into a book so that I could have it when I came back. 58 authors that wrote on solitary retreat, quotations, poetry, even how to do solitary retreat and guidance. And we published it just for the cost of printing. It's just $6. I brought a daughter with me in the back, and she has copies of this book if you'd like to pick them up. She's smiling broadly there. She's my great support. And the other one is this book, A Year of Silence, which is the book that I wrote while I was on retreat in New Zealand, and it's in the bookstore and available for you, for sure. I also am very, very pleased that this particular book was adopted by the New Hampshire Library Association as a book on their Books to Go program. So if you're part of a book club in New Hampshire or even other places, your book club can discuss this with questions at home. So it's available for you, and I'm thrilled. It's rare that you have a book on solitary retreat. Right. So ask them for it. So those are my 2 plugs.
There's some stuff on Zoom. Neil, you were waving. Did you have a question, Neil?
I do. Thank you. Can you hear me okay?
Yeah.
Oh, good. Kira, it's so delightful to see and hear you from here in Michigan. I wanted to ask, what have you learned this time about successfully coming back from retreat, from integrating back into a more worldly active life? What can you share anything about that?
Did you hear that?
I think so. When I came back from New Zealand that year, I went from New Zealand to Bali for 2 weeks to be quiet and learn how to use the phone and the internet, and then flew back to New Hampshire and tried to continue to have somewhat of a quiet life, but a very active life it turned out to be. So I set aside one day a week where I did not answer the phone or see people or anything from Thursday night until Saturday morning. It was called Friday, Silent Day. And I did that for more than 6 months, and it worked. This time I was not abroad. I was in the United States. I came back in summer in July, and I just told people, I'm taking the summer off. I'm going quietly and slowly. That's why it's now October when I'm doing this talk and not late July. So he asked me, and I said, wait, later. So I just come back in going very slowly and watching it. And I mean, it comes down to only seeing one friend a day. That's it. For 1 hour. That's it. That's the rest of the time I'm by myself and quiet. So really monitoring carefully my interaction with others and what I could take in, because it's completely exhausting and overwhelming. But mind you, I was back 6 weeks and I flew to England.
That's right. Yeah.
to a convention with 500 people, because we were not going to have an international convention in Northern Hemisphere, until 2028. And I thought, I'll be really old school then. So I better show up in England. And it was great. People said they were so overwhelmed. I wasn't overwhelmed. I was thrilled. I was delighted. But, you know, I would be with people in the morning and then rest and be quiet in the afternoon. I kind of picked what I could do and what I couldn't do. But I was thrilled. I brought this little book with me and did a talk with people. And it was, I mean, if what I did was to benefit others, I need to share it with others. So
Thank you. We have one more in the chat and then we'll have to wrap up.
I know.
So was there something that while on the retreat was calling you back to your home, and how did you overcome it? That's the
Having to
question.
overcome it. Cherry Garcia ice cream?
Oh.
No. I came back with such a big smile on my face. I was so thrilled to be back. I was so delighted to see smiles, to see human beings and to be among them. And my heart broke when I saw all the stress that they were struggling with and not noticing how they were letting themselves be overwhelmed by much of it. But I came back, as I have at other times, with such a tremendous love of humanity and of others that no, I didn't have to overcome it. I just keep pouring it out, hopefully. So,
Thank you.
I thank you. Thank you all.